Congratulations, you have made it to the end. But it is not the end of the development, the continual growth, the improvement and betterment and greater humaneness of your leadership. This is day 8, and I'm calling this integration. We've looked at all of the principles in the first day as an overview, and then we've gone through each individual day, each individual principle to get you really grounded, still at a very surface level, but very grounded in each one of those principles and a particular aspect or element, just to give you an idea of how expansive and inclusive, I'll come back to that, each of those principles are in your life and in your leadership. And what I mean by inclusive is, well, for the first principle, how you feel. You can't lead well if you don't feel well. So we just did the lead principle yesterday, right? But leadership is dependent on how you feel, your key notions of worth, what you know, how you think, your reasonableness in logic, your voice, how you creatively express yourself and impart your message for understanding and communication and engagement, and then your dream, which is kind of two things. Not only the difference you want to make in the world and the goals you want to accomplish, but the ways in which you're going to set yourself up to be the most effective and influential and impactful in doing that. So we've got all these individual threads, and that's what I love about the picture I have chosen overall for this program, of these 6 colored threads going through a needle and just then becoming one single thread on the other side, because everything is connected. Yes, you can pull them all apart. You can create the gaps in between so you can observe each principle independently, but these principles do not stand alone. They are very, very powerful unto themselves, but make them work together. Whoa, it is just an exponential increase. So if, as you go into the future, thinking about these things, come back to these practices, come back to the acronyms that explain each one of these principles, and see if you can take something new, investigate further, get more curious about how you are showing up in the world as a leader with queer integrity. Okay, so this is the final step. I'm going to help you pull together all of the threads. So leadership is not a fixed destination. You go to a course, you get a passing grade, maybe you get an A+ if it's graded in such a way, and you're like, okay, you're done. Go out into the world and be a leader. You're the best we've ever seen. No, because you're always going to come up against different people, different challenges, new challenges, and situations that are going to challenge you based on what you know, your lived experience, and the wisdom you use, which is the intellectual humility based on the knowledge and the skill sets that you have and how you apply all of that in the difference making you're attuned or attached or invested in doing. Okay, so leadership is not a fixed destination, it is a living practice. So as I've already said, over the past 7 days, we've explored an overview and then the 6 core principles individually that help you to lead and to lead with queer integrity. So let's take a moment to pause so that we can reflect and integrate. So the reflection will require that you go back and look at what you wrote down in response to each of the exercise. First, I want you to just consider which of the 6 pillars: feel, know, think, voice, dream, or lead is asking for your deepest attention right now. Where do you think you need to put some effort, some attention where do you believe that if you gave extra attention and practice to that pillar, your leadership would overall improve? You would feel more authentic, whole, integrated, without doubt, and more confident. And alternatively, or on the opposite side, where do you feel the greatest desire or the greatest resistance to step forward? So, where in your leadership, where in those principles do you feel the greatest desire or the greatest resistance to step forward? Quick personal example, under the first principle, feel your well-being, which is your physical health, your nutritional health, your emotional, your mental state, and how you take care of all those things with different kinds of practices. I have been challenged in the last while in how well I take care of my physical body, working out. I used to be a personal trainer for close to 20 years. You'd think that would be an easy thing for me, but it's been very interesting observing how things have really shifted, how my values have shifted, what's really most important and meaningful to me. And the expression, you can't keep doing the same thing if you want to see things change in the future. I've had to adapt and change the ways in which I work out, or the kinds of workouts that I do, or the kinds of exercise that I do, and change the volume and the intensity and the frequency because, in part, I've got older and all the other things that I've already mentioned. But I'm still struggling with it. I haven't abandoned it. I am not ignoring it. But would I like to just say, oh, screw it? Everything else will fall into place on its own. Sure, that's human nature. But I know when I don't feel well, I can't lead well. When I don't feel well, I just, strategic thinking, creativity, they don't work for me. And for this work that I'm doing, I need to feel well, or I need to feel well enough. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to do what I most want to do. So, where do you feel the greatest desire or the greatest resistance to step forward with one of these principles? So, those are your general observations of what you've learned over the past, how many days? 7 days so far. And I have an option A and an option B, but I invite you to do both because they're one's a set of questions like what I've been asking you up to this point, and the other one is a highly integrative practice that could give you something that you could put on a single piece of paper and carry with you, or put on your wall as something that you can use to remind yourself of how these principles can play out in your life. So, some reflective integration questions to explore a little bit more deeply what you've learned as a result of now having gone through each of the 6 principles. So the first question is, what did you learn about yourself? It could be very general. What did you learn about yourself, or what did you learn about your leadership? And what do you want to adopt as part of your leadership style that you may have seen in the acronyms for each one of the principles? Is there something there, a key word or an idea, definition for one of the key words from one of the acronyms that, wow, made you go, wow, that's great. I know this, but I hadn't thought of this, or I haven't been paying as much attention to this, or this really resonates with me. Second question, what was most surprising? What was most challenging? What was most illuminating for you throughout this journey? Did you have an aha moment? Did you have a oh, Homer Simpson moment where you're like, well, of course, I actually really like dope moments because it tells you something really important about yourself. It tells you what you know, but you haven't really integrated. You haven't brought into all of who you are. You haven't brought to the conscious level to fully practice. So it means it's something that you've learned along the way. Perhaps you've tried it. Perhaps you weren't ready for it. But it's been kind of slowly simmering in the stew So it's there, but kind of like when you're cooking and you take a taste, when you're making a stew or a soup, it might be, simmering for several hours on the stove, and you're like, something's missing. And then suddenly you realize what it is. And you add that and you tasted it again, and you're like, oh, okay, that's the integration. That's the piece that was missing. So the final question for option A here is, which small, consistent practice can you carry forward from each principle to embody your leadership with greater clarity, conviction, and queer integrity? So we tried to go through something that you could do with each one of the principles. So basically, there's 6 possible practices. And in some of the days, the principles that we looked at, there was a few more opportunities for actions you could put into place. So go through all of those. And you could pick one from each section, or you could just pick the one which goes back to the earlier questions about, what's the one thing? If we focus on too many changes at once, you probably know this, you're likely going to fail more easily. Pick the one that you think will have the greatest benefit. There's this idea of really focusing on the one thing and the one thing only. Because when you focus on the one thing that you have decided is the most important or could give you the greatest amount of impactful efficacy, effectiveness, change, improvement, what have you, if you focus on that one thing, the other things may just fall off and no longer become necessary, or focusing on that one thing will actually lead to improvements in the other areas that you wanted to put into practice. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Now, this is an exercise I absolutely love. It's called sentence stems. It's a very powerful practice within coaching because it invites you to think through a whole bunch of options, almost like a brainstorming. Very often how this is used, it's a single question and you try and give as many responses to it as possible. In this case, I'm integrating my 6 principles and asking a question, or rather than asking a question, it's starting a statement that you complete. So this is a very creative, very generative reflection that allows you to look back and take what you've learned and to really integrate it into your being, your sense of self, so that you can say, from what I've learned, this is who I am with respect to the principle of how I feel and what I know and how I think and so on. So the first sentence stem is, when I feel well, I. And then what I know is, that's your key notions of worth. When I think wisely, I am. When I express my unique voice, I sound like. My dream is, and I lead by. So if you've never done this exercise before, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. That's maybe not the right expression here, but I'm going to read you mine to give you an idea. And what you're going to see is that what I've imparted in this program, you're going to see very strongly in how I've answered these sentence stems, because I am living and coaching and writing through my philosophy and my principles. Okay, I have very strongly integrated my personal identity with my creative work identity. I don't really see them as separable. Okay, so here's mine to help guide you in the process, but hopefully without giving you any ideas. I don't want you to copy this. This needs to feel whole, authentic, and like you. When I feel well, I can lead well, and I care enough to make a difference. What I know is that I stand for a human-hearted ethics grounded in personal responsibility, dignity, respect, and the freedom to express my creative purpose and being an advocate for queer rights. When I think wisely, I am flexible and resilient, open-minded to new ideas that may challenge both my thinking and beliefs, strategic yet reasonable. When I express my unique voice, I share my ideas through vulnerability, humor, and metaphor, challenging convention and unexamined beliefs. My dream is to support and create meaningful and impactful social transformation that advances fairness, dignity, and respect for a common humanity. And I lead by challenging myself to follow the path of human-heartedness by practicing non-contention, impartiality, compassion, yielding flexibility, humility, and commonality. I love that. I really love the sentence stems that I've created for myself. It feels both powerful and resonant. And when I released a breath at the end there, when I exhaled, I felt so contented. This is what I want for you to experience. And take a stab at this. Work on it. Keep writing it. Try it a few times. Do each sentence stem a number of times until you get that resonance and everything really connects with you. So what I would suggest is that once you have this, print this out or handwrite it out on a piece of paper. Have it somewhere that you could look at for a while. It's something like a mantra, I guess you could say, where you can really see the impact of this over time when you remind yourself of what's most important to you and how you're going to show up to lead with queer integrity. When we embrace something new, when we learn something new, and then we delve into the practices, the research or the work to feel it, to practice it, to know it, it's new. We haven't created habits. We haven't added that yet to our wisdom, which is why I ask the question when I think wisely. Wisdom for me is this aspect of there's book knowledge, but then there's wisdom. And wisdom is the humility and the compassion and the intellectual reasoning to take what we know combined with our lived experience and to say, with what I know, with what I've experienced in life, how can I best understand this situation in a way that helps me understand and build bridges? So the final question, the question from the margins is, what part of your queerness do you now see as a strength in your leadership? Something to honor, something to protect, meaning not to closet, not to suppress, and something to share. What part of your queerness do you now see as a strength in your leadership, something to honor, protect, or share? You've done the courageous work of reflection, insight, and intention. And I invite you to recognize that the real world practice begins when we learn something like this. The true definition of integration means that this becomes part of who you are. This improves your being as we go forward in life to become better leaders, not because we're bad or imperfect. We just are. But we can always seek to create improvement that is lasting and transformational, which starts within at the integration, at the integrity level, and expands outward. And that's what gives you more power, more in the sense of influence and impact, not power over, but power to be the best of who you are and express that for the world to work with. So you do not need to be perfect, and you certainly do not need to perform for others' benefit. You only need to be present to yourself, to your values, and to the change or changes that you're here to support. So keep leading with queer integrity. The world needs your voice now more than ever. The world needs your wisdom and your human heartedness. Thank you for taking part.